first question. Let me say this, for the past 2 years, actually, to be exact, from 2020, beginning of November, until beginning of 2022, again, beginning of November, there was an Eastern African country who has been alienated from the region, sanctioned by the US, and then the West. Of course, it's a US-led West, as we like to call it here at Connect Africa, sanctioned and again denied funding and loan by the Western countries, and then by the so-called international organizations, but we know who they are. And then particularly the leader of this country has been demonized as hell, accused of genocide in the country. And then, he has faced as well, I'm separating now the leader from the country because it has, they have targeted specifically on him. So the West has ganged up, I can say, against this country and leader, and even the citizens of these Western countries have been told to that point to leave the country in the name of the armed rebel group that the US sponsors, which the US, without shamelessly says it, the armed, in the name of the armed group, going to control the country, and then you have to leave the country. And then this rebel group has been sponsored. The US and international organization have been its spokesperson. All this, in 2 years. But then, so this leader was one of the invitees of the 49 countries to the US Africa Summit, and he has defied everything that has been said, against him and against the people that he lead. And that person that I'm talking about is Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who kind of shined in this summit. Now, what can the other African countries can learn from what has been done and how he carried out the chaos, the conflict that happened in the country, and how that was turned around? Don't get me wrong, please. There are still things that's going on, conflicts in the country, but the major things that has been going on for the 2 years have been ended with a peace deal, with the principle of African solution to African problems. Now, what can Africa learn the way Ethiopia has been in this summit? So Kwame, back to you. I just wanted to give a background to the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much for the background you put, so succinctly and eloquently. Of course, there's a lot of lessons to learn from this summit and how it happened. If you look at the players, there were 2 players, the United States and Africa, and the various stakeholders on the African continent. And when we go to how nations behaved at this, summit, when we look at Ethiopia, for example, and how it handled itself, different nations decided to handle themselves differently at this summit. Also, we saw how President Akufo-Addo behaved at the summit. We saw the Prime Minister Abiy also how he carried himself. We saw the President of Zambia how he carried himself. President Hichilema. We saw President Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of Congo how he carried himself, and what can we learn from all these people, from all these nations? First of all, I would like to commend the chairperson of the African Union, President Macky Sall, for stating clearly the 6 points which he put out there, on behalf of the African continent. And he made it clear, he made our demands very clear, he made our expectations very clear to the United States, what we expect from the United States when you talk about the environment, when you talk about security, when you talk about our energy policy in Africa, what our energy policy should be in Africa, when you speak about food and fertilizers, when you talk about the sanctions on Zimbabwe, he made it very clear that the sanctions on Zimbabwe, we would not want to entertain, continue the sanctions. Africa stands behind Zimbabwe. And when you talk about also the fact that we don't want to bring the Cold War on the African continent, we want to do business with all partners across the world, and those who want to do so, they should compete in whatever they are doing, not compete in what we are doing together, not to come here and tell Africa what to do and who not to partner with, like the United States, how it is passing bills in its parliament, its Congress, like the HR 7311, that bill which is racist to the Africans and disrespectful to the Africans. So the chairperson of the African Union Commission, the chairperson of the African Union, I think made very clear the position. So I think I would like to applaud him, President Macky Sall. He did a very good job. Now, when we go to people like President Nana Addo, before I come to President Abiy, of course, President Nana Addo, we have a whole video is dedicated to his approach at this summit and what happened there. And so I would just go direct to Prime Minister Abiy. I think that there's a lot of things to learn from what Ethiopia achieved and through its conduct at this summit. If you look at Prime Minister Abiy, this is a man who has been struggling with the United States, interference and the Western interference in the country. Ever since there was a crisis in the northern part of the country where we got rebels trying to destabilize the country, which was developing very fast. As we mentioned in the past, Ethiopia, by the time coronavirus came and these rebels came and started disturbing the country, Ethiopia was the fastest growing economy on the African continent by 2020, before the COVID and before this crisis that started. And these guys actually were, came to retard the progress of the nation, which was made. And so, but what can we learn from how Abiy, even with all this, with all this that is supposed to be even a grudge towards the United States, but he was able to carry himself, with grace, with a lot of grace, and diplomatically handle the situation on not only on the continent, but even with the people who wanted to overthrow the government. And we saw pictures, of course, we saw videos. Biden and the Prime Minister Abiy, they were watching, the World Cup together. We saw them, hugging. We saw them laughing, and talking to each other and having, a conversation which you would say that it was an amicable conversation. And so what can we learn from the Prime Minister Abiy? One, which I can pick out, starting, number one, I think that as Africans, for us to respect ourselves, we need to insist on what we want as Africans, because without insisting, we will not be respected as a people. You can see that Prime Minister Abiy was being respected at this summit because he insisted and he said that we want African solutions to African problems. And he insisted However much the UN tried to interfere, however much the US tried to interfere, however much Europe tried to interfere, in this rebellion, in this conflict that was happening in the northern part, Prime Minister Abiy put his foot down and said, this is an African matter. So even actually the issue of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam, he put his foot down and said, this is an African matter. And we think that the African Union is the one which is responsible for solving this issue. And he insisted it. So this is a big lesson. That is lesson number one, that when we insist as a people, we are going to be respected. We have to insist on what we want as Africans. If it is our security, and we say we are going to take care of our security, like what the Prime Minister Abiy, insisted, in Ethiopia, that the Ethiopian Defense Forces, they will be able to stabilize the country, and Africans will be able to negotiate and bring peace to the region. It was done. It was done. The African Union actually also believed in him, and the other Africans, in South Africa and the East African region and the Horn of Africa, they believed in him and they rallied behind him, and we were able to achieve this. And this is something which I expect people like President Nana-Addo in Ghana to be doing also. This is a big lesson for people like President Nana-Addo, who has been instead, behaving. Actually, the Prime Minister Abiy is younger than President Akufo-Addo. He's way much younger than President Akufo-Addo. But this is a lesson President Nana-Addo, who is actually an elder, should be learning. He should learn how this conflict was solved, in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia. It should be a lesson instead of creating animosity between nations, between creating animosity and going off the line, the official line of the African Union, because the official line of the African Union was already stated. But we see that President Akufo-Addo decided to go off the line of the African Union. So this is a disrespect to the African Union as Africans. Number two, that I can learn. Actually, before I go to number two, I see that lesson of insisting on what we want as Africans. Also, I saw that President Museveni also was able to reach an agreement with the Americans that they are going to finance, the refinery in Uganda up to $4.5 billion. Now, this refinery is going to serve the whole of East African region, because we don't have an oil refinery in the East African region, not a single one. But at the beginning of this process, at the beginning when Uganda wanted to build an oil refinery and a pipeline, actually when it wanted to build an oil refinery, Total was refusing, and Heritage Oil, they were refusing that Uganda should not build a refinery, that it is not profitable, it is not viable. So the president of Uganda insisted and said that if they don't want to build a refinery, they will not take oil. They will not take oil from the ground from Uganda. And the president asked that, how come that Iran has more than three refineries and all of them are profitable? How and now you are telling us in Uganda, where there is no refinery in East Africa, that our refinery will not be profitable. Actually, when they did a feasibility study, they said Uganda's refinery will be one of the most profitable in the region. But this was through insistence. Now, the lesson here is insistence. What we learn from these two characters, these two figures, these two presidents, from first of all, Prime Minister Abiy and Museveni, is insistence. Now, the refinery is going to be built, and also the pipeline is going to be built, the two of them. So insistence and confidence. So when a leader goes and then he's reporting another country, even to foreigners to the African continent, it shows that somebody lacks confidence, is not sure about his leadership, is not sure about his confidence he doesn't have confidence in his leadership to be able to work with the regional leaders to solve any problems that come in the region. So that is number one. I'm finishing number one. Number two that I wanted to make, we need to respect our institutions as Africans. We need to respect the African Union. We need to respect our armies. How can you expect the nation to have confidence in your leadership if you as a president, you do not respect the institutions on the continent? We have been crying as African citizens that we do not respect the African Union. I mean, we have been crying that the African Union is not doing its work, okay? And we have been complaining. But in broad daylight at this US-Africa summit, we saw President Nana Addo disrespecting the African Union. And this is not once. This is not the first time. During the 77th, the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly, while the African Union was mentioning that we want to be neutral in this conflict between the United States and Russia and in China, we as Africans, this was the position of the chairperson of the African Union, was that we want to work with everyone. We are ready to work with everyone, whether it is the Chinese, whether it is the Russians, whether it is the Americans. Everyone who wants to work with us, we are ready. And we do not want to see Cold War brought to Africa again, because we have suffered this before. These were the words of the chairperson of the African Union during the 77th, session of the United Nations General Assembly. And to re-emphasize this, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa is also a very big leader on this continent. She came, Madame Naledi Pandor, she came and re-emphasized that. Even when you look at the vote, majority of the African nations, they voted and they abstained or voted against the bill to condemn Russia. So what was the purpose for this? The purpose for this was that Africans were speaking and saying, we want to be neutral. We are ready to cooperate with everyone. If America has its differences with Russia and China, it should not bring them on the African continent. It should solve them from wherever they are, where it wants. If it wants to confront Russia, it should go and confront Russia from Russia's territory. If the United States wants to confront China, it should go and confront China in the South China Sea, and they should solve their problems over there. But they should not come to Africa. This was the clear position of the African Union. President Akufo-Addo came out at the United Nations 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly and contradicted what the African Union is saying. So this is the disrespect to the African Union. And I think that this should not be happening, from a nation, and this is not on Ghana, actually. I would not like to say this is on Ghana. I understand that he's the president of Ghana, but I don't want to put this on Ghana, because Ghana is a great nation, is a pioneer in Pan-Africanism. The Ghanaian people are very strong people when it comes to Pan-Africanism. Some of the best Pan-Africanists have come from from Ghana as a state, that is part of the African Union. And if an individual like him comes and says these things, even though he's the president of Ghana, it makes me question his stand as a president. It makes me question his stand, and for me, I've come to to a certain level, I've come to believe that his stand actually is not representing, the Ghana I know, Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana, which is a trailblazer when it comes to Pan-Africanism, is a pioneer when it comes to, Pan-Africanism and defending the continent. So that is lesson number 2, that our institutions, not only the African Union, but institutions like the Ghana Armed Forces need to be respected. If you are saying that Americans should come and protect you from people who are fighting against terrorists, actually, they are not protecting you from terrorists. You didn't call them to come and protect you from terrorists. These people have called for help to fight the terrorism. This terrorism which the Americans and the Europeans have failed to fight. These people are fighting their own, they are finding their own solutions. And one of the questions which President Traore asked, President Traore of Burkina Faso asked was that, where has Akufo-Addo been when the terrorists are killing our people? Has he offered any help? He has not offered any help. So they decided to find their own solutions. Where has ECOWAS been? It has been busy imposing sanctions instead of finding solutions to the region. You see, so if these people have decided to find solutions to their problems and you are complaining about them, then why not reach out to them as a statesman, as an African statesman? So this is where the problem comes in. And we say that it is better to respect the institutions, respect the Ghana Armed Forces, because you can't say that a few 1,000 Americans are greater than the 10,000s of the Ghana Armed Forces. So I think that this becomes a disrespect to the Ghana Armed Forces. It becomes a disrespect to the African Union as an institution. It becomes a disrespect to the other African leaders on the continent. And it becomes a disrespect to us as citizens of the African continent, because we expect much more from our leaders. We are talking about African solutions to African problems. This is our newfound narrative. And we have been fighting to unify the continent. And when somebody comes and tries to compromise our position as Africans, this becomes very unfortunate. And we think that the other African leaders have to learn from this. So those 2 points for me are very important. And then the point number 3 is the importance of engaging the continent. Engaging the continent. Even I know I've touched it a little bit, but that is point number 3. I mentioned number 1, the importance, the importance of us respect. One of the points I mentioned, I said that we need to respect the institutions. We need to respect the African Union. We need to be consistent, in our demands as Africans. We need to have our own narrative. Those are 2 points. And number 3 for me would be that we need to engage the continent instead of running around, that we are looking for solutions from outside, because we have the solutions here as Africans. It is President Nana Addo himself who has been saying we should not be begging. He's begging for security. He's the one who has been saying Africa beyond aid. So if we are talking about Africa beyond aid, let the words be consistent with actions. Let the words match to the actions. So for me, these are the lessons which we can learn from this. And when you look at people like Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, I think he ticks on all of these 3 points. He has been victorious, and you can see that he's being respected even in Washington when he's talking, because he has been consistent on all these 3 points. And this is the payment for consistency. This is the payment for his consistency. And they will respect you. President Nkrumah was respected on this continent, was the most respected president on this continent, even up to today, because Nkrumah insisted and said the Africans can solve their own affairs. They can solve their own problems. Even during the independence speech, he said that when we are going to show the world that when the black man is given an opportunity, he can show the world that he is somebody. He can solve his own affairs. He can handle his own affairs. These were Nkrumah's words. So in essence, Nkrumah was talking about African solutions to African problems. He was saying that the African, the black man can manage his own affairs. We are going to show the world that the black man can own, his continent and can solve his own affairs. And this is this is the work. I believe this is the work that people like Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, are working. This is the move they are, he's making. These are the feet within which is making, and the respect for the African Union, which we spoke about, and the engaging the region before you move out to speak to other people. Prime Minister Abiy, while there was a problem within his country, inside the country, and he was being antagonized by external forces, the Americans and the Europeans. He didn't go out there to the Chinese. He didn't go out there to the Russians. He came to his fellow African leaders. He came to the region. He came and saw President Uhuru Kenyatta at that time, who was the president. He came and saw, President Museveni in the region. He came and spoke to President Cyril Ramaphosa. He spoke to the African Union. Why is President Nana-Addo not speaking to the Africans, and you go and speak to the Europeans? I mean, this becomes unfortunate. You don't respect the African, you don't respect the Africans. You don't respect us as a president. So I think these are huge lessons for us to learn. Huge lessons, to learn, from what the Prime Minister Abiy, has achieved in trying to stabilize Ethiopia. And these are lessons which are transferable to the rest of the continent, to the other parts of the continent. Thank you very much, Mahlet. Let me pause a little bit from there.
Thank you very much, Kwame. Actually, you have touched also. Our second talking point was on President Nana Akufo-Addo. I like the way how you compare and contrast between Prime Minister Abiy and President Addo. So it really came out good, so that people can see really the difference. Actually, it's like the exact opposite. So it was better to see to analyze the two together. So yeah, I do agree 100% with what you have said. You have laid up, for our for the introduction part, so that we can have an understanding when they say summit, US-Africa summit, and trade, and this $55 billion pledge, that actually that money is not there, and how they have been inconsistent also in keeping their words, not because they don't want to give it, but because really in reality they don't have the finance. I think that's one topic by itself for one day to discuss. As you said, you have some interesting figures with us, that you can show us, and to make a presentation really how the US trade with Africa is declining. That will be really interesting for people. They think that every time they talk about in millions of dollars, billions of dollars, they think they have the money. And then also I like the way how you give, all these leaders have their criticism from their own nation, and then from different parts, from the diaspora, also from the same from their own diaspora outside of the continent. But to learn, to make it even a habit for us to give the credit where it is due when they do good. You have touched, or we have touched upon it also last time when we discussed South Africa. There may have been this, alleged allegations against him, but we need to talk about those good things that he has done. So same is true. I'm referring actually now to Macky Sall, what you have said. Whether they do it or not, we don't know, but we take them for their words. We just hear and we analyze from the deep, starting from the words that they put out. So the speech of Macky Sall is one of a kind that we wanted to hear. So it's good that you brought it. And then as for the lessons, indeed, yes, to respect ourselves, to be consistent. Ethiopia has been really consistent from the beginning, really. So that was important, and to give value and principle, not only talking and, being Pan-Africanist. Here you talk, these Pan-African words, and then next day with the next leader, you do something else, which is exactly Nana Akufo-Addo, what he did, the president of Ghana. So yeah, that was really important. And then the diplomacy part, how Ethiopia has been consistently engaged its own nation first. The call was to the nation inside, and then mobilizing the people from outside, also the Ethiopian diasporas or Ethiopians in abroad, and then also our brothers and sisters of Africa and the leaders to engage them. Those are the things.